The Blackwood Hotel loomed on the outskirts of a forgotten town like a relic of darker times. Its once grand facade was now marred by years of neglect, a crumbling edifice where every peeling layer of paint and every creaking floorboard whispered secrets of despair. Even by daylight, the hotel exuded an aura of melancholy, as if the building itself mourned a past it could neither forget nor escape. Nathaniel Drake, the night clerk assigned to this decaying establishment, had grown accustomed to the eerie solitude of his post. Night after night, he manned the ancient reception desk, surrounded by an oppressive silence punctuated only by the distant groan of settling wood and the occasional hiss of a faulty neon sign. Yet there was one secret that gnawed at his mind, a secret so steeped in rumor and dread that even the hardiest locals avoided speaking its name: Room 13. Room 13 did not appear on any official record. No matter how many times Nathaniel reviewed the hotel's ledger, the room was conspicuously absent, its existence known only by furtive glances and hushed whispers among the few who dared work in or frequent the Blackwood. It was said that guests who checked in and were assigned that room never returned. Some claim the room shifted its position within the building, evading both memory and record. Others swore that strange lights, unnatural sounds, and violent occurrences emanated from within its walls. For Nathaniel, whose own nights had grown restless with dreams of unspeakable horrors, these stories were more than mere folklore. They were a call to uncover the truth. On a bitter autumn evening, as a relentless wind rattled the broken window panes and rain lashed the cracked sidewalks, the hotel took on an almost sentient air. Shadows stretched unnaturally long along the dim corridors, and the chill in the air carried the unmistakable scent of decay. Nathaniel settled into his routine behind the desk, methodically checking in a handful of guests whose eyes reflected the same wariness he felt. Then, just as the clock neared midnight, a solitary knock sounded at the back entrance, a sound so unexpected that it sliced through the oppressive silence like a scream in the dark. Startled, Nathaniel rose from his chair and moved toward the source. There, standing in the gloom, was a man whose presence was both enigmatic and unsettling. His face was half obscured by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat, and his eyes burned with an intensity that belied his otherwise nondescript appearance. In a low, almost desperate tone, the stranger uttered a single request: "I need to stay in room 13. The word sent a shiver down Nathaniel's spine. No guest had ever dared mention room 13, least of all requested. A ripple of dread washed over him as he hesitated, glancing at the silent corridors behind him. But the man's gaze was unyielding, and his voice held an authority that left little room for negotiation. With trembling hands, Nathaniel retrieved a small, cold metal token from a drawer, a key that did not bear a room number, yet was implicitly tied to the forbidden chamber. The stranger accepted it with a nod so solemn it seemed to seal an unspoken pact. Then, as mysteriously as he had appeared, the man melted into the shadows of the corridor, leaving Nathaniel with more questions than answers. The clerk's steps echoed in the corridor as he followed the path that, according to the ancient blueprints, should have led him to a door labeled Kai 13. But when he reached the end of the hall, the door that awaited him was no ordinary portal. It hung slightly ajar, the thin crack revealing only a flicker of dim, otherworldly light. For a heartbeat, Nathaniel felt as though the door itself was breathing, a slow, measured inhale that beckoned him forward. Compelled by a mix of duty and the irresistible lure of the unknown, he stepped through the threshold. Immediately, the atmosphere inside shifted. Dust particles danced in the feeble beam of his flashlight, and the room's dimensions felt warped, stretched and contracted as if it existed on the edge of sanity. The furnishings, arranged in disarray as if tossed by some unseen force, hinted at a violent past, but nothing prepared him for the sight at the center of the room. There, dominating the space, was a grand mirror cloaked in a layer of unnatural mist. Its surface rippled as if disturbed by an unseen hand, and below it, a dark, swirling vortex pulsed rhythmically on the floor. The vortex emitted a faint, sickly light, drawing Nathaniel's gaze with an almost hypnotic allure. As he inched closer, the hairs on his arms stood on end. In that moment, the room seemed to whisper, a soft, insidious invitation to peer beyond the veil of mortal understanding. In a flash of sensation, visions overwhelmed him. Endless corridors shrouded in darkness, anguished screams echoing from unseen depths, and the looming, spectral figure of a cloaked woman with eyes full of bitter vengeance. It was a glimpse into a realm where time was meaningless and torment reigned supreme. The vision receded as quickly as it had come, leaving Nathaniel shaken and breathless. Over the following nights, the mystery of Room 13 consumed him. In the lonely hours after midnight, while the rest of the hotel slumbered, he scoured the dusty archives of the Blackwood. His investigations unearthed fragments of disturbing lore, a diary hidden behind a false panel, cryptic notes from the hotel's original owner, and whispered references to forbidden rituals performed in a desperate bid to harness unworldly powers. According to these accounts, Room 13 was more than a room. It was a gateway, a portal to a timeless realm of agony and despair, ruled by a spirit whose bitterness and sorrow had transcended death itself. The diary, its pages yellowed with age and inscribed in a frantic, almost maddened hand, told the story of a man who had once sought to control forces beyond mortal kin. In his hubris, he had opened a door to a dimension of relentless torment. The writings recounted harrowing details of guests who had ventured too close to the abyss, individuals who had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only bloodied remnants and whispered warnings of spectral retribution. One entry recounted the fate of a guest whose body was later discovered in a dismembered state, as if torn apart by invisible claws, a fate that sent shudders through every retelling. Nathaniel's nights soon became haunted by nightmares. In these dreams, the corridors of the Blackwood shifted and twisted into labyrinths of despair, and the voice of the vengeful spirit, whom the diary named Marrow, echoed in every shadow. Marrow, once a victim of betrayal and cruelty in life, now ruled a realm where souls were damned to an eternity of suffering. The spirit's mournful wails and vengeful curses wove through Nathaniel's sleep, leaving him in a state of constant dread and uncertainty. But as the terror grew, so did his determination. Each fragment of evidence, every unsettling vision, fanned the flames of a resolve that burned brighter than his fear. He resolved to confront the darkness head-on, to understand, and if possible, break the ancient curse that had for so long ensnared the hotel and its hapless guests. One stormy night, as thunder rolled like the drums of an approaching war, and lightning split the sky in jagged arcs, Nathaniel returned to Room 13. The door beckoned him with a silent promise of answers and a threat of unimaginable peril. The room, now colder and more oppressive than ever, seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The mirror's surface shimmered, and the vortex on the floor churned with renewed vigor, as though eager to draw him into its inky depths. His heart hammered in his chest as he advanced, each step a defiance against the growing tide of terror. As his hand closed around the tarnished doorknob, he felt an almost imperceptible brush, a ghostly caress that sent a chill through his very soul. In that moment, the line between duty and destiny blurred. The call of the forbidden room was no longer a mere curiosity. It was an inevitability, a summons to the dark truth lurking at the heart of the Blackwood Hotel. Nathaniel knew that to unravel the mystery, he would have to confront forces far beyond the realm of the living. And so, with trembling determination, he stepped fully into room 13, leaving behind the mundane world and venturing into a darkness where time, sanity, and even the very notion of hope were to be sacrificed. The door creaked shut behind him, sealing his fate as the oppressive gloom swallowed his form. Outside, the wind howled like a chorus of mourning souls. And somewhere deep within the walls of the Blackwood, an unearthly scream pierced the night, a sound of agony and defiance that heralded the beginning of a descent into the unknown. Thus began Nathaniel's journey into the heart of terror, a path that would lead him into realms where every step was haunted by the specter of violence, and every moment threatened to shatter the fragile barrier between life and eternal torment. In that forgotten hotel where the past and present coalesced in a tapestry of dread, the true nature of room 13 and of the vengeful spirit that ruled it waited to be uncovered. The moment the door sealed behind him, Nathaniel found himself suspended in a twilight that defied explanation. No longer confined to the decrepit corridors of the Blackwood Hotel, he was cast into an otherworldly limbo, a vast, shifting maze where time and space tangled like serpents in the dark. Here the laws of reality splintered into echoes of despair, and the only sound was the relentless pounding of his own heart. As he moved forward, the floor beneath his feet seemed to ripple and sigh as though it were a living, breathing entity. Corridors stretched into infinity, their walls inscribed with indecipherable symbols that pulsed with a sickly, phosphorescent light. Every turn revealed new horrors, doorways that led to vast, empty halls filled with whispered voices, and narrow passageways where the very air felt dense with malevolence. In these corridors, Nathaniel's mind began to unravel the boundaries between memory and nightmare. Flickering visions of past guests, those lost to room 13's curse, drifted at the edge of his vision. Their faces were contorted in silent screams, their eyes pleading for salvation. He could almost hear their voices merging into a mournful dirge, a lament for souls trapped in an eternal cycle of torment. In a secluded alcove, Nathaniel discovered a chamber that seemed less warped by the chaotic energies of the realm, a small sanctum where time held a fragile, if eerie, coherence. The walls here were adorned with faded frescoes depicting figures in agony and despair, scenes that hinted at ancient rituals and betrayals. At the center of the room stood a pedestal bearing a large leather-bound diary. Its pages, yellowed and brittle, were inscribed in a frantic scrawl that chronicled the hotel's darkest history and the origins of its cursed room 13. As he pored over the cryptic entries, Nathaniel learned of a long-forgotten ritual, a desperate attempt by the hotel's original proprietor to harness otherworldly power. In his hubris, he had torn open a portal to a realm where suffering reigned supreme, binding a vengeful spirit known as Marrow to the very walls of the hotel. The diary spoke of sacrifices made in blood and hope, of souls ensnared by a force that defied mortal comprehension. With each word, the weight of the hotel's legacy pressed heavier upon him, and the realization struck that his fate might be inextricably linked to these ancient transgressions. No sooner had Nathaniel absorbed these grim revelations than a piercing cry shattered the uneasy silence, a sound that resonated with both sorrow and malice. From the murk of a long, narrow corridor emerged a figure, luminous yet terrible in its form. She was the spectral embodiment of Marrow, a woman whose beauty had been warped by centuries of suffering, her eyes burning with a vengeful, otherworldly fire. Her presence was both a warning and an invitation, as if she were testing the resolve of this unwitting intruder. "You dare disturb my domain?" Marrow's voice slithered through the darkness, a chorus of despair that reverberated in Nathaniel's bones. The air grew frigid, and unseen forces lashed out. Shadows materialized into monstrous shapes, their claws rending the very fabric of the corridor as they attacked with savage fury. Furniture and debris, remnants of a forgotten time, hurtled about as though animated by a malignant will, each object a potential instrument of unspeakable violence. For a moment, it seemed as if the realm itself had become a living nightmare, a vortex of raw, unrelenting torment. Yet, amidst the chaos, Nathaniel's determination surged. Every instinct screamed to flee, but he recognized that escape would only prolong the suffering of the souls caught in this infernal web. The answers he sought lay in confronting the darkness head-on, even if that meant facing the full wrath of Marrow. With no weapon but his own resolve, Nathaniel advanced. The corridor became a battleground where spectral forces clashed with the remnants of his fading hope. He recalled the incantations scrawled in the margins of the diary, desperate words meant to sever unholy bonds. Summoning a courage he scarcely believed he possessed, he began to recite them in a trembling voice. As he spoke, the air vibrated with an almost tangible energy. The swirling mists of the corridor seemed to recoil, and for an instant, the malignant onslaught faltered. But Marrow was not so easily subdued. Her eyes, a tempest of anguish and fury, locked onto him. And with a bellow that merged both sorrow and rage, she surged forward. The ensuing struggle was as brutal as it was surreal. Nathaniel dodged splinters of spectral energy, his every movement a desperate dance against a tide of otherworldly violence. At one point, a forceful blast sent him crashing against a wall that writhed with shifting patterns of agony. Blood, whether his own or some spectral substitute, spattered across the ancient stone, marking him as both participant and victim in this cursed tableau. Yet even as his body ached and his spirit teetered on the brink of collapse, the diary's words echoed in his mind. Redemption was forged in the crucible of pain, and only by embracing his own inner darkness could he hope to dispel the malevolent force that governed this realm. In the midst of the carnage, a fragile light began to pierce the oppressive gloom. A narrow archway, bathed in an ethereal glow, beckoned like a lifeline. Nathaniel, battered and exhausted, recognized that this might be the threshold to either salvation or further damnation. Was it merely another trap set by the capricious nature of this realm, or did it offer a chance to reclaim his shattered soul? Tentatively, he stepped toward the light. With each footfall, the violent cacophony receded to a dull roar, replaced by a mournful silence that seemed almost sacred. On the far side of the arch, the corridor opened into a vast chamber, a grand, if decaying hall that held within its center a swirling vortex of energy. It was here that the diary hinted the final confrontation must occur, where the bindings between the mortal realm and the timeless abyss could be severed. But even as hope flickered, the specter of Marrow loomed large. Her form, now even more menacing in the half-light, advanced with measured inevitability. "You have come far, mortal," she intoned, her voice now a blend of lament and malice. "Yet your defiance comes at a price. To break this curse, you must first surrender to the darkness within." Nathaniel's heart pounded in his ears. He knew that the next moments would determine not only his own fate, but the destiny of every lost soul bound to Room 13's cruel legacy. In that vast chamber, where the air shimmered with both promise and peril, the final lines between redemption and ruin blurred into one. As he squared his trembling shoulders, Nathaniel prepared to confront not only the wrath of Marrow, but also the haunted specters of his past. A confrontation that would demand every ounce of his strength and every shred of his humanity. The battle for salvation had only just begun, and the price of victory would be measured in both agony and sacrifice. The vast chamber, once bathed in an ethereal glow, now writhed with a malevolent energy that threatened to tear the very fabric of reality asunder. The swirling vortex at its center pulsed like a dark heart, a portal not only to a realm of eternal torment, but also to the memories and souls that had been sacrificed over generations. Every echo, every tremor in the air bore the weight of countless lost lives. Nathaniel's body trembled, not solely from physical exhaustion, but from the dread of what he was about to face. In the moments before the final confrontation, the corridor seemed to stretch into an endless expanse of shadow and despair. Every footstep he took resonated like a death knell, announcing his defiance against an ancient force that had claimed too many before him. At the far end of the chamber, amid the writhing darkness, the spectral figure of Marrow emerged. Her form was a horrifying blend of sorrow and rage, delicate features twisted into an eternal snarl, her eyes blazing with an intensity that belied her ethereal beauty. Her voice, layered with centuries of torment, echoed through the hall. "You dared challenge me, mortal," Marrow hissed, her tone at once accusatory and mournful. "Every soul that has crossed this threshold has been consumed by the darkness, their hope extinguished forever. Why should yours be any different?" Nathaniel squared his shoulders, his resolve hardening even as the oppressive gloom threatened to smother him. "I am not here to be devoured by your curse," he declared, his voice echoing defiantly in the vast emptiness. "I seek to break the cycle of agony and free those you have ensnared. I will not allow your vengeance to claim another victim." At those words, the air trembled, and the chamber roiled as if reacting to the challenge. Shadows detached from the walls, twisted, malformed apparitions that lunged toward Nathaniel like ravenous beasts. With barely a moment's hesitation, he recited the incantations scrawled in the ancient diary, his voice trembling with both fear and determination. The words, drenched in old grief and desperate hope, resonated through the chamber, clashing with the dark forces that swirled around him. Marrow's scream rent the silence, a sound that was part fury, part despair. With a violent gesture, she summoned tendrils of inky darkness that lashed out, rending the air and tearing at the edges of Nathaniel's sanity. The force of her assault sent him staggering backward, crashing against a pillar that seemed to bleed shadows. Each blow felt like a severing of the ties between the mortal world and the abyss that had claimed so many. Yet even as pain surged through him, Nathaniel fought to steady his heart. Every incantation, every whispered plea from the diary's pages bolstered his determination. He realized that Marrow's wrath was not born solely of malevolence. It was the anguished cry of a spirit betrayed, a soul condemned to an eternity of isolation and sorrow. And perhaps, buried within that tortured rage, lay the possibility of redemption. The chamber itself became a battleground of clashing realities. On one side, Nathaniel, a solitary beacon of fragile hope, wielded ancient words and raw determination. On the other, Marrow, the vengeful specter, commanded the forces of despair with a terrifying elegance. Their struggle blurred the lines between the physical and the metaphysical. Shards of broken glass, fragments of memories, and echoes of past horrors intermingled with the violent outbursts of supernatural energy. As the battle raged, the swirling vortex at the chamber's center began to widen, its dark energies pulling at both combatants. Nathaniel felt its magnetic allure, a promise of oblivion for those too weak to resist its call. But he also sensed something more. A final opportunity to sever the unholy bond that tied Marrow to this realm, and with it, the curse that had long tormented the Blackwood Hotel. In a moment that stretched into eternity, time itself seemed to splinter. Nathaniel channeled every ounce of willpower he possessed, reciting the incantation with a voice that grew louder and more resolute with each passing second. The very air shimmered as if caught in the throes of an unseen tempest. Marrow's eyes widened with a mix of fury and despair as the ancient words began to unravel the dark energies around her. But the price for such defiance was steep. In response to the incantation, the chamber convulsed violently. Pieces of reality splintered away like shattered glass. Nathaniel was thrown to the ground by a force that seemed to emanate from the vortex itself, his vision blurred by a mixture of pain and blinding light. For one agonizing moment, he saw a cascade of images. The faces of those lost to Room 13, the final moments of desperate souls, and the overwhelming void that awaited them all. As the chaos reached its zenith, the ghostly figure of Marrow advanced once more. Her face, once contorted with rage, now bore an expression of profound sorrow, a haunting reflection of the life and love that had been stripped away by the cruelty of fate. "You think you can free them?" she whispered, almost inaudibly, as if the weight of centuries pressed upon every syllable. "The darkness is not so easily undone. To break the curse, you must offer something in return, your very essence, your memories, your hope." Nathaniel's heart pounded as he realized the grim truth. The incantations, the desperate battles, and the spectral violence were all but the precursor to a final, unthinkable sacrifice. Yet in that moment of despair, he saw a glimmer of possibility. The lost souls that had haunted the halls of the Blackwood were not merely victims. They were also echoes of lives that had once been filled with love, hope, and dreams. Their cries were a call for liberation, a plea that transcended the bounds of mortal suffering. Drawing upon the final reservoirs of his courage, Nathaniel responded, "If I must surrender part of myself to free these souls, then so be it. I will not let the cycle continue." His voice was steady, even as the toll of every agonized moment reverberated in his bones. With a deliberate, almost ritualistic motion, he extended his trembling hand toward the pulsating vortex. In that instant, the chamber roared with a cacophony of tortured screams and the sound of breaking bonds. Light and darkness entwined in a violent dance as the energies within Room 13 converged upon Nathaniel. He felt his identity ebbing away, memories dissolving into a torrent of emotion. Yet amid the sacrifice, a profound sense of peace began to blossom. In surrendering a part of himself, he was also offering redemption to the tormented souls, and in doing so, weakening the unholy tether that bound Marrow to her domain. Marrow, caught between her rage and the deep-seated sorrow of her own cursed existence, faltered. The furious storm of energy that had once made her unstoppable now slowed, her form wavering like a candle in the wind. "No, this cannot be," she murmured, her voice breaking under the strain of conflicting emotions. The spectral chains that had kept her tethered began to shatter one by one as Nathaniel's incantations, imbued with the essence of self-sacrifice, filled the chamber with an almost tangible hope. The moment of reckoning had arrived. The vortex, no longer a swirling maelstrom, of pure malevolence began to recede. The dark energy that had enshrouded the chamber evaporated like mist under the morning sun, replaced by a dawning light that illuminated every crevice of the haunted hall. The spectral apparitions that had once raged in torment fell silent, their anguished cries replaced by a gentle, bittersweet lullaby of farewell. Marrow's form, now less defined by rage and more by sorrow, drifted toward the crumbling walls of room 13. Her eyes, pools of unfathomable grief, met Nathaniel's with an intensity that spoke of countless lifetimes of regret. "You have done what few have dared," she whispered. "Your sacrifice, your willingness to give of yourself, has shattered the cycle of torment. But know this, the darkness will always linger in the corners of the world, waiting for the moment to rise again." In that fragile exchange, Nathaniel understood that his journey was both an ending and a beginning. As the last vestiges of the curse unraveled, the souls that had been imprisoned for so long drifted upward, freed from their eternal prison. The Blackwood Hotel, its legacy marred by sorrow and violence, began to weep as its haunted history was finally acknowledged and, in a way, absolved. As the chamber fell into a profound stillness, Nathaniel struggled to rise, his body battered yet buoyed by the overwhelming sense of purpose that now filled him. The incantations had exacted a heavy toll. Pieces of his past, his hopes, and the very essence of his identity had been surrendered to the void. But in their place, a resolute calm had taken root. He knew that the Blackwood Hotel, and room 13 in particular, would never be entirely free of darkness. Evil, after all, was a force as ancient as time. Yet tonight, for the first time in decades, a light had pierced that darkness. With the spectral remnants of Marrow fading into the ether, Nathaniel took a final, lingering look at the chamber. The grand mirror that had once beckoned with otherworldly allure now stood as a silent testament to the price of defiance and the hope of redemption. In its reflective surface, he saw not only his own battered visage, but also the silhouettes of the freed souls, each a reminder that even in the depths of torment, the spark of life could endure. Stepping away from the vortex, Nathaniel began the slow, arduous journey back through the labyrinthine corridors of the Blackwood Hotel. Each step was a victory over the oppressive gloom, a silent promise that the horrors of room 13 would no longer dictate the fate of those who sought refuge within these walls. The echoes of violence and despair still lingered in the recesses of the building, but now they were tempered by a newfound resolve, a commitment to remember the lessons of the past and to guard against the resurgence of such unbridled malevolence. Outside, as the first pale light of dawn broke over the horizon, the storm had finally abated. The rain that had battered the hotel through the long, torturous night subsided to a gentle drizzle, washing away the remnants of darkness. The Blackwood Hotel, a monument to despair and haunted secrets, now stood as a somber reminder of the eternal struggle between light and shadow. Nathaniel, though forever changed by the ordeal, carried with him the bittersweet knowledge that redemption was not found in the absence of darkness, but in the courage to confront it. With the dawn came a new chapter, one in which the scars of the past would serve as a guide to healing, and the echoes of lost souls would remind him that every sacrifice had meaning. As he stepped out into the cool morning air, the silence of the night gave way to a tentative peace, a silence filled with the promise of renewal and the lingering hope that, even in the face of ancient horrors, humanity's indomitable spirit would prevail.